God bless everybody. It's February 16th, 2020. We're going to do a short video, which I believe is going to be a major factor in the next 3 years for Israel. As you know, I'm a big one on Erdogan of Turkey being Gog of Ezekiel 38:39, and that he is the first seal or white horseman of Revelation 6:1. I've been talking about this for a few years. As we can see, Erdogan is now in the process of going through Syria. He invaded on Yom Kippur on October 9th of 2019, which is actually my birthday. Just a coincidence anyway. Anyway, it was my birthday, and then he did invade into Syria on that date. He went in. I believe this was the breaking of the first seal, and that he is going to bring a quarter of the world or the Middle East into war, and this will then bring on famine, pestilence, world economic collapse, and a number of things with it as this evolves into a nightmare in the Middle East. And I noticed the other day when I was reading Joel 1, something stuck in my head. First of all, Joel 1 is about the locust plague that will decimate Israel prior to the attack of Gog of Ezekiel 38:39 and the white horseman getting to Israel with his 10 Muslim nations. Joel 2 and 3 are about, Joel 2 is about Gog's invasion of Israel, the destruction of his armies by God, and the remnant that flees into the hidden place, or what we call Edom or Petra, for the 1260 days as God hides them away from Antichrist before abomination of desolation, which happens in the 3.5-year middle mark of the 7-year covenant of death. Joel 3, though, is all about Armageddon. Okay, so Joel 2 and 3 are not the same as a lot of people think. And I think if you look at the imagery that he's placed down here, you will also understand that they are not the same. 2 is about the attack of Israel by Gog and how those armies will be destroyed, and then they will be, the Jews will be scattered as a remnant or taken captive, where Joel 3 is about the Valley of Jehoshaphat and the Battle of Armageddon, which happens on the 6th bowl. Okay, so they are definitely not the same. I think once you see this, you will start to understand the clarification between the 3 different chapters. But Joel 1 is extremely interesting to me because it tells us that prior to this attack of Gog and his armies, with the decimation of Daniel 8 just prior to this, because we're going to see the Kurds align with Iran. This is what Daniel 8 states. I'm going to go with what the Bible says here, and that these two nations, which the Kurds aren't really a nation because they coexist with about 4 different countries in that area and don't really have a capital, but they're been there as long as anyone else, and they are going to be shoved out of this area due to the cleansing factor that Erdogan of Turkey is having upon them, or a genocide of these people. There are good Christians in this group too, so we must keep our prayers open for them. But it tells us that the Kurds will join with Iran and that Turkey will then crush them. As this happens, I believe this will again give Erdogan his crown, his white horseman crown, that will then allow him to gain his 10 nations of Muslims that will end up into Israel and been given the power for 1 hour, the authority to attack this small country the size of New Jersey for 15 days prior to the 6th seal breaking, and God killing them, as stated in Joel 2 and 3. So once Daniel 8 occurs and Erdogan attacks these two kings, the Kurds and the Iranians that have joined, we will see him gain his Ottoman Emperor crown. And as he starts to move to Israel, and we're already seeing him align with some of these African nations like Libya and Sudan and some of these, we will see a Joel 1 plague of locusts happen to Israel prior to this attack of these 10 nations upon them. And it tells us in Ezekiel 5:12 that 1/3 shall die by pestilence. You're talking about the Jews here in Jerusalem and in Israel. But they will die by famine and be consumed. All the country will be consumed. It will be a devastating plague based on what Joel 1 tells us. That everything will be eaten. All the fortunes of Israel will be gone after 72 years or so, because they were built and created as a nation in 1948, that this will all be taken from them. That this is a judgment against the Jews because they don't believe in Jesus as God's Son, and that they have to repent and come back through the only open door, and that is through His Son. You cannot get to heaven or God unless you believe in Jesus, and they don't. And that's why the church was taken to the Gentile side through Ruth. We'll go into that some other day, but Ruth is the production of David, which allowed the Gentiles to move into the church and be grafted. Because we are one of the 12 nations, or potentially even the elect, and most think, well, that's a Jew thing. No, we were grafted into this tree, and so all of us, any of us that God favors, can be one of these 144,000 elect, even a Gentile, because we're not really a Gentile anymore since we were grafted into the Jewish tree. But that's a conversation for another time. So once we get to Joel 2, it talks about this massive invasion by Gog of Ezekiel and how this is going to be a devastating factor, and that 1/3 of the Jews will also die by this. And so this is where Ezekiel 5 through 12, or Ezekiel 5:12 states that 1/3 part of the nation will die by pestilence, 1/3 will be consumed by the sword, and 1/3 will flee and be taken to the hidden place. So this is something that I wanted to bring up. This is something that I have brought to the attention to a number of people. I just wanted to do a short video about how Joel 1 states that before Gog's invasion and the destruction of the Iranians and the Kurds prior to this, we will then start to see a locust invasion over into the Middle East that will devour the country of Israel prior to this Gog attack of Ezekiel 38-39 with these 10 nations that will probably happen before 2023. The reason I state that this might happen in this time frame, and I brought this up a number of times, the parable of the fig tree indicates that a strong nation, this is Psalms 90:10, that a strong nation is 70, or a generation is 70, a strong generation is 80, and that we will be flown away, we will fly away, and that's the 7th trumpet, before the bowls start to fall, which is God's wrath, the 7 bowls, okay? That's what the 7 bowls are, is God's wrath, and that's all that is. If anybody tells you that the wrath of God is before that, they don't know what they're talking about, because God clearly tells you His wrath are the 7 bowls, and we will not be here for that. But this parable states that on May 14, 1948, the generation or the birth of Israel occurred. They became a nation. The 70-year generation that just happened is on May 14th of 2018, and we're already into 2020, so we were already about 2 years into this parable. And if you look at this and how it falls within that 10-year parable to 2028, you'll notice that we're going to see Gog attack the Kurds in Iran, destroy them. This will then give him his new Ottoman Emperor crown. This will then allow him to rebuild this caliphate and the new Ottoman Emperor and the empire. This will then allow him to drive through the Middle East and will bring on this locust invasion. He will then get to Israel by 2023. Now, if you know prophecy at all, if he dies and he's buried for 7 months in his armies, now we're into 2024, we will see then a resurrection event of Gog into Antichrist by around the 2024, and then we have 3.5 years to abomination. Abomination occurs, and then 75 days after that, we see the Lord come back on the seventh trump around the Feast of Trumpets, which is a 2-day event. Maybe that's why we can't tell the specific day or time, because it overlaps on 2 days. And then we start to see the bowls drop. So this is something to think about. And so is the parable of May 14, 2028, the strong generation, the end? I hope so, for at least the believers, and they won't be here for the rest of the nightmare of the wrath of God, which probably will extend. God says it's a day, could be a year long. This is a debate that we're trying to figure out, is how long these bowls do drop. But the fifth bowl will be the destruction of the seed of Satan, which I believe is Pergamus, Turkey, and Mystery Babylon. And I've gone into a lot of depth about this and how the bride and the bridegroom will be silenced. And also in Joel 3, we come back to that slave route, that selling of the people of Israel through Palestine and up into the Grecian areas. So keep your eye on these things. I think it's important. We just saw a bunch of locust invasions into the African nations and the East, the Asian nations in general. And so we need to keep an eye on these things, is all I'm saying. So I just wanted to bring this to your attention. Please keep watch. Time is short. Erdogan, I believe, broke the first seal, so we have entered the sorrows or the birth pains, and he will end up on Israel's doorstep. But you got to watch a couple things. Daniel 8 states he will destroy the Kurds in Iran. He will absorb them, and we will have a locust invasion prior to his attack into Israel. And so I think if God states these things, these are things that we should be aware of. And if we see them coming, then we know that we should be cautious in how we go forward. Because the sixth seal event, when Erdogan dies on the Temple Mount, is going to affect the whole world. Not only is he destroying the 10 nations that go against him and the countries that have attacked him, he's doing an infrastructure decimation of the rest of the world so he can prepare for this nightmare that's coming up called Antichrist. And if you see the sixth seal pop and you see those 10 nations form around Israel, you've got 15 days to figure it out. Because once that happens, he selects the 144,000, we start the trumpet phase. Well, a third of the world is decimated in this before Antichrist even comes out. So when the sixth trumpet happens and Antichrist comes forward, the world will be ready for their misery to be taken away. And that's why we're here, is to show you the truth, to let you understand what is coming, so that you know how to prepare and keep your families, your loved ones, and your congregations of your churches and the people that you care about and anyone else that will listen, know that this is coming. God bless you, everybody. Have a great night.